You've seen it happen more times than you can count, and every time it feels just a little too intentional to ignore, because the moment you get up, even if it's just for a second, your dog quietly slides into your seat and settles in as if that space had always belonged to them. At first, it might look like a coincidence, something casual or even a bit funny, but the more you notice it, the harder it becomes to believe that this is random behavior, especially when your dog chooses your exact spot instead of any other comfortable place in the room. And what makes it even more intriguing is the timing, because they don't do it while you're sitting there, and they don't always do it when you leave the room entirely, but somehow they seem to wait for that precise moment when your presence lifts just enough for them to move in. Most people brush this off as a quirky habit, something harmless and even endearing, but beneath that simple action there's a layer of meaning that reveals how your dog actually sees you, your space, and their relationship with you. Because for a dog, your seat isn't just a physical location. It carries your scent, your warmth, and your emotional imprint, which transforms it into something far more significant than just a place to sit. And once you begin to understand how dogs interpret territory, connection, and proximity, this small, almost invisible behavior starts to look less like chance and more like a silent form of communication that's happening right in front of you. What your dog is doing in that moment is not just choosing comfort, and it's not simply about finding the warmest spot available, because if that were the case, any recently vacated place would do, yet they consistently choose yours. This is where things start to shift, because when a behavior repeats with precision, especially in animals, it usually means there's a pattern rooted in instinct, emotion, or learned association. And your dog, without saying a single word, is expressing something very specific every time they take your seat. The question is not whether it means something. The question is what exactly they're trying to tell you when they do it. Because once you see the reason behind it, you won't look at this behavior the same way again, and more importantly, you'll start to recognize that your dog has been communicating with you in a way that most people never even realize is happening. What most people assume in this situation is that their dog is simply chasing comfort, because the seat is warm, it's soft, and it carries the residual heat from your body, which makes it naturally more appealing than other spots in the room. And while that explanation feels logical on the surface, it doesn't fully explain the precision behind the behavior, because dogs have access to many comfortable places, and yet they repeatedly choose the one place that holds the strongest connection to you. This is where we need to shift the perspective, because from a dog's point of view, your seat is not just a physical object, it is a concentrated source of your presence, even when you're no longer there. Dogs experience the world primarily through scent, and your scent is one of the most powerful anchors in their environment, acting almost like a signal that tells them where safety, familiarity, and emotional connection exist. When you leave your seat, what remains is more than warmth. It's a dense imprint of who you are, and for your dog, stepping into that space is like stepping directly into your presence. But there's something even more interesting happening here, because this behavior is often selective and intentional, especially in dogs that are highly bonded to their owners. They don't just occupy your seat randomly. They do it in moments when there's a subtle shift in the environment, when your absence is recent enough that your presence still lingers strongly. This tells us that your dog is not just reacting to comfort, but actively seeking proximity to you, even when you're not physically there. And in behavioral terms, this falls into a category of actions that are driven by attachment, not opportunism. Because if it were purely opportunistic, your dog would treat all warm spots equally. But instead, they prioritize the one that is most strongly associated with you. This distinction matters because it reveals that your dog is making a choice based on emotional relevance, not just physical comfort. And once you understand that, the behavior stops looking like a random habit and starts looking like a deliberate attempt to stay connected. Right in the middle of everyday moments, in something as simple as sitting down or getting up, your dog is constantly adjusting their position in relation to you, trying to maintain that invisible thread of closeness that defines your bond. If you pay attention, you'll start to notice that this isn't the only time they do it, because dogs often follow similar patterns in other situations, choosing your clothes, your bed, or even the exact spot where you usually stand. None of this is accidental. It's all part of how they navigate connection. And if you enjoy understanding this type of deeper behavior, the kind that completely changes how you see your own dog, it's worth following the channel, because this type of detail, when observed closely, reveals much more than it seems at first glance. Once you move past the surface explanation, what starts to emerge is a much deeper psychological pattern. because this behavior sits right at the intersection of attachment, security, and social positioning inside your dog's mind. Dogs are not just reacting to the world around them, they are constantly mapping relationships, identifying where they belong, and adjusting their behavior to maintain closeness with those they consider part of their core group. And in your dog's world, you are not just a provider or a companion. You are a central figure of stability, which means your presence carries emotional weight that extends beyond simple interaction. When your dog takes your seat, what they are often doing is regulating their own emotional state, using your scent and the residual presence you leave behind as a way to maintain a sense of calm and connection. This is especially common in dogs that have a strong attachment bond, because proximity to you, even indirect proximity, reduces uncertainty and reinforces a feeling of safety. But there's another layer that many people overlook, and it has to do with how dogs perceive social space. In a group dynamic, position matters, and occupying a place that is strongly associated with a key individual can reflect both comfort and a form of social alignment. This does not mean your dog is trying to dominate you, which is a common misconception, but rather that they are syncing themselves with you, placing themselves in a position that feels emotionally and socially significant. In other words, your dog is not replacing you. They are connecting to you. And this distinction changes everything, because it removes the idea of competition and replaces it with the idea of attachment-driven behavior. At the same time, this action can also be influenced by learned reinforcement, because if your dog has ever received attention, eye contact, or interaction after taking your seat, even in a playful or corrective way, that response can strengthen the behavior over time. Dogs are incredibly sensitive to patterns, and even small reactions can shape how often they repeat certain actions. So what you're seeing is not a single cause, but a combination of instinct, emotional regulation, and learned experience, all converging into one simple behavior that most people never question. And once you recognize that, you begin to see your dog less as a creature acting on impulse, and more as an animal constantly navigating a complex emotional landscape, using the tools they have available to stay connected to you. When you start to see this behavior through the lens of connection instead of coincidence, it naturally shifts the way you interpret your dog's actions, because what once looked like a small habit begins to reveal something much more meaningful about the relationship you've built together. Your dog is not just reacting to your presence when you're there, they are actively seeking ways to maintain that connection even in your absence, which tells you that the bond goes beyond interaction and moves into something more constant and internal. And this matters because many behavioral issues in dogs are rooted in how secure or insecure they feel when separated from their owner, even briefly, which means that something as simple as taking your seat can actually be a window into their emotional baseline. If your dog calmly occupies your spot and relaxes there, it often suggests that they find comfort in your scent and can self-soothe using that connection, which is a sign of a healthy attachment in most cases. But if the behavior comes with signs of restlessness, agitation, or hypervigilance, then it may point to a higher level of dependency, where your absence creates a small but noticeable emotional imbalance. This is where observation becomes more important than correction, because the goal is not to stop the behavior blindly, but to understand what role it plays in your dog's internal state. Many people instinctively push their dog away from their seat, thinking they are reinforcing boundaries, but without context, that reaction can interrupt the self-regulating behavior that is actually helping the dog feel secure. At the same time, this doesn't mean you should ignore patterns that become excessive, especially if your dog seems unable to settle without occupying your space, because that can indicate a need to gradually build more independence. The key here is balance, because a strong bond should allow for both connection and separation without distress. And what makes this behavior so valuable is that it gives you a subtle, everyday signal of where your dog sits on that spectrum. Instead of guessing how your dog feels when you're not paying attention, you can start reading these small actions as feedback, as indicators of comfort, attachment, and emotional reliance. In a way, your seat becomes more than just a place in your home. It becomes a reference point in your dog's emotional map, a place where they reconnect with you when direct interaction is not available. And once you recognize that, you stop seeing the behavior as something to correct and start seeing it as something to interpret. The next time you get up and your dog quietly moves into your seat, the scene won't feel as simple as it used to, because once you understand what's really happening beneath that behavior, it becomes impossible to see it as just a coincidence or a harmless quirk. What you're actually witnessing in that moment is a decision, one that's shaped by memory, emotion, and association, where your dog is choosing the closest possible version of you that still exists in the environment. And that choice carries intention, even if it's silent, even if it happens in a matter of seconds, because your dog is responding to something real in their perception, something tied to how they experience your presence and your absence. Instead of seeing a dog taking a seat, you start seeing an animal maintaining connection, using scent, warmth, and familiarity as tools to stay anchored to the person that represents safety in their world. And when you look at it this way, the behavior stops being trivial and starts becoming meaningful, because it reflects a bond that continues even when you're not actively engaging with them. This is where a subtle shift happens in how you respond. You don't rush to correct, you don't instinctively push them away, and you don't dismiss it as something random, because now you understand that your dog is not just occupying space, they are navigating emotion. At the same time, you become more aware, more attentive to the context, noticing whether your dog settles peacefully or remains alert, whether the behavior is occasional or constant, and what that might say about their level of comfort when you're not right beside them. And that awareness gives you something most dog owners never develop, which is the ability to read behavior not just as action, but as communication. Because dogs are always communicating, not through words, but through patterns, positioning, and choices that repeat over time. And once you begin to recognize those patterns, even the smallest moments start to carry meaning. So the next time it happens, instead of reacting automatically, pause for a second and observe, because right there, in that quiet, almost invisible action, your dog is showing you how they feel about you. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that demands attention, but in a way that is consistent, subtle, and deeply connected to the bond you share. And once you truly see that, it changes the way you see them.